Generative and positive words of hope and change and growth. Healing trauma, survivors and marriages. And change and grow. Healing trauma, survivors and marriages. Healing trauma, survivors and marriages. Healing trauma, survivors and marriages. Healing trauma, survivors and
Hello, everyone. I have a special guest today. I'm so excited to bring on for you all someone I know and I've known for a while now, Josh Brower. He's got a law degree. He's doing woodworking. He's actively retired. He's a disabled veteran. He helps veterans all the time. He's been diagnosed with depression and anxiety since 1999, and he's working on life. He's also uh, uh, retired dentist, I guess, and he's just doing amazing work still. We have Josh here. Josh, how you doing today? How you doing?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks, Christopher. I appreciate the invitation to come on today and to share a little bit with you and your guests. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir. I'm glad to have you here. Excited to interview you and talk to you. Just having a good old time here. Tell us about your history with anxiety and depression. I know that's something that's a big thing with people, and we had Mental Health Month last month, and so what's your experience like? Doing working with anxiety and depression?
Well, I was in the military back in the 90s and I guess into the early 2000s. And just before 2000, I just wasn't feeling well. I was struggling with a boss that was unhappy with me. I had elected not to reenlist as a commissioned officer, and part of the rating of the officers above you is that it's part of their retention. How many officers do they retain? And so there was kind of a conflict of interest where if they couldn't retain you, it didn't look good for them. And so despite the fact that there were lots of reasons for why lots of people were getting out, it goes against that person who's trying to retain you. Although I saw that conflict for that person, it became personal because they had been trying to get promoted for quite some time and struggling, and they just took it out on me. And in the military, there's not a lot you can do if the person that's in charge of you doesn't like you for any particular reason. And so there were some things that were done and said that made my life very difficult. And at the time, I was young. I had a young family. I had not been a dentist for many, many years. And there was a lot of stress, because if you get in trouble, it can affect you the rest of your life. So I just was working in the laboratory one day, and one of the other senior dentist came up and he said, hey, come, I want you to meet my wife. And I was like, oh, this is a really nice guy. I've been working with him for some time. I didn't really know him very well, but he'd always been nice. He was a prosthodontist, someone who specializes in like crowns and bridges and dentures and things. And I thought I was just going to meet his wife. Well, he brought me over to meet his wife, and it turned out that his wife was a psychiatrist, and he could tell that I had developed symptoms of anxiety and depression without me realizing that I had.
Mm.
And so he just had me sit down, and she started talking to me and asking me questions about life and how things were going on. And, through that session and a couple others, I found out that I had depression, and anxiety. And I knew I had anxiety, but I just considered it worry. Like everybody has worries in life. And the depression at the time, in our society was kind of a little bit voodoo, like that's not really a thing. People don't really have that. And if you did, it wasn't really well understood. It was probably just you. And there weren't a lot of solid diagnoses and a lot of variety of medications at the time. Zoloft and a lot of the SSRIs and things like that had not been around that long in clinical use. And Prozac was, a really big buzzword. You were seeing it on TV about that time. And, I didn't really know what was going on. And honestly, I had kind of always self-medicated my worries away prior to that time by just exercise. I would go out and work out really hard, and it would make me feel better. And until that time, it had always worked. And I noticed that it had stopped working. And so, she explained to me what anxiety and depression was. And essentially, I just had kind of a tipping point where it had become so much that I wasn't going to fix it with just, my own little exercise routine and, meditation and things like that, which at the time I didn't know that that's called CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy. But I know what it is now. And of course, I feel like I've gone a long way down the rabbit hole of deciding what I wanted to do to try to help myself, because, as she explained it to me, this is not curable, it's treatable. And she was the first one to put me on some medication. And, I think that everybody who has anxiety and depression and gets diagnosed goes through a few medications. And when you're doing that, everybody kind of finds out what works for you, what doesn't work for you. Universally, I think everybody has the feeling of, this doesn't make me feel the way I like. And unfortunately, that's a bad thing that we all feel that way. And if we wanted to feel the way we used to feel, then we wouldn't actually be treating our symptoms. And so I found myself that, I felt a little bit on some of the medications that we were trying, because you got to try different ones. I felt like a zombie. I felt like I walked through my day just like the world was gray. I felt like I felt nothing. I gained weight. I had every kind of shift that you can imagine, trying different medications and things. And thankfully at the time I had a really supportive family, and I would have a flare up, and, I'd never been someone that laid in my bed and couldn't get out of bed until 30 years ago. And when that happened to me, that's when I went, okay, maybe this isn't like a made up thing. Maybe I really do have something wrong. And I remember very distinctly when I finally convinced myself that, yes, I had something wrong with me, because up until that time, I thought this was more of a willpower thing. And I had been doing something I always enjoyed doing. And I went almost exactly a year later and did the exact same thing, and I did not enjoy it. And I remember, this is what's different. This has always made me happy doing this, and I'm not happy doing this today. And there's nothing at all that would make me feel different, other than the fact that it's been a year and now I just have been told I have this problem. So it was a real distinct mental shift for me to admit to myself that I had a problem that I couldn't solve on my own, that I couldn't treat by myself. And, I was trying these medications and thinking that it was never going to get better. And in reality, I finally happened upon a medication. Right now, I'm still on the same medication that I finally happened upon, 20 plus years ago, and it was bupropion. And I believe what it was used for back then was it was called Wellbutrin, and it had come out for people that were smoking, and it was kind of like for OCD, because they would usually want something in their hands. And what it did for me was make me feel like I just didn't have those clinical symptoms that I'd had before, to a level where I couldn't treat them myself.
Mm,
And when I couldn't treat them myself is when I just couldn't feel good. I always just felt blah or bad.
mhm,
And I couldn't get to a point where I was happy. And so what happened is I'd never given up on the CBT, but what I found is that once I found the right medication, the CBT actually kicked me over back into the I can be happy again.
okay.
And I had read, as a doctor, and someone that's likes to read, as someone who's done law school, I had read every single thing about happiness that you could possibly imagine, every single thing about depression, anxiety, all the theories, and spent a lot of time trying to um, see if there were answers, that I could talk to someone about, my therapist, my physician, who, was my prescriber. And they were always very supportive, but I definitely found that I had done a lot more research than they had. And they may have been at the cutting edge of the treatment side. I was more at the theoretical edge of what might be next on the horizon. So I was
Mm,
always looking at, well, if this medication works good, what about this medication that they're coming out with? And if this treatment works good, what do you think of this? And so I went back and forth for a long, long time, trying to, I figured if I could feel happy, how happy can I feel?
mhm,
And it was something where I really wanted to see where I would end up, you know. And ultimately, I went down that road of, well, I love chocolate cake, but yet too much chocolate cake doesn't make me happier.
mhm,
So, I love pizza. Too much pizza doesn't make me happier. And I found that really the only thing that ever never got old, never stopped making me feel better, no matter how much of it I had, was helping other people.
mm,
And so it became kind of a central tenet for me of my CBT, of what I wanted to do. I found that, there were things that you can do like in more critical moments. I found like when I was more at a low, comedy was very helpful. They say
mhm,
laughter is the best medicine. There's all that research study. And I found that, if I couldn't sleep one night, I would just get up and find some comedy, whether it's a TV show or stand up and watch it. And even though I might not fall back to sleep, a lot of my symptoms that were making me not sleep well seemed to be feel better. So I found kind of things that were useful to me for acute symptoms, and for symptoms that were more just kind of benign and insidious that were always there. And I found some that were day to day. And ultimately, I never felt symptoms when I was helping someone else. And
mhm,
so I feel like when you are out there trying to help somebody, you're not really thinking about yourself. And that's really what anxiety and depression is when you um, start to look outside yourself. Depression, anxiety comes from within. And when you can focus on outside yourself, a lot of your own symptoms about yourself get better. So, in a nutshell, I've had these careers. It's funny to me, but maybe not to many, that, as a dentist, you're high stress level, high anxiety rate, high suicide rate. Someone with a law degree, same kind of thing, high suicide rate, high stress level. And I just keep gravitating into these fields where ultimately I'm helping someone, but they don't want to be helped because they wish they weren't there to begin with. You
Yeah.
know, there's very few times when you really want to go see a dentist or really want to go see an attorney. And what I found in my dental practice side was that I started looking to what patients came in that wanted to see me. And nobody comes in with a broken tooth that wants to see you, but the people that wanted braces were improving their lives. They were happy to see me. And those that wanted dental implants were giving teeth themselves, giving their teeth back to themselves. And
Hmm.
so ultimately, I focused heavily on that. And that worked out very well for me as far as changing the way I practiced. And it forced me to have other dentists working for me that would do more of the routine day to day things
Hmm.
so that I could focus on these areas that made me happy. And then ultimately, I found that one of the things that gives dentists a lot of depression and anxiety is working alone. And so
Really?
by having those people around me, it's like you're working with your friends and you're able to just communicate with people that you might know from school or know from other social circles versus someone that's there solely because you're paying them to be there. They might like you, you might like them, but ultimately they're only there because you're paying them to be there. Whereas some of the people that you end up working with are there because they want to be as much as they want to make the money for being there. So I
Hmm.
think that was a valuable lesson that kind of came out of that I didn't even realize I was going to learn. So I feel fortunate, that I've learned some lessons along the way that were inadvertent. I've learned some lessons because I didn't know better, and I think the most important lesson was just that helping others helps me probably as much as helping them. And I think the Dalai Lama said something like he called it wise selfish. He does it because it makes him feel good. You know,
Hmm.
um, but ultimately, I think that's kind of the best treatment of all for anxiety and depression is helping someone else. Um, so I know when we talked about doing this podcast, we were going to talk a little bit about the difference between CBT and medications and mixing and matching and the best results. And, you know, I went down pretty far down the road of the CBT side of what can I do? I think ultimately you need to be your own best advocate for your own healthcare. And I think that you get your best results when you research. I know a lot of doctors really hate it when a patient comes in and pulls out their Google degree and starts questioning them. But ultimately, that keeps us on our toes and it also gets you better care than you would get if it was just, coming in and going, okay, this is what I should do, because it really forces you to understand why the treatment is the way it is. So ultimately, I think it helps, the patient and the doctor, even though it may annoy the doctor. I think it's helpful to the care for the patient and it's helpful for the doctor to always be questioning their own modalities. It's easy to fall into, oh, I really like this drug. I really think this drug works great, to the point where you don't look at new drugs or old drugs. You just found one. And it may be easy, but it may not be the best. So I think continually questioning ourselves is very, very helpful. So, um, what are your thoughts on the power of CBT versus medication, Christopher?
I think you hit the nail on the head, Josh, when you talked about the CBT piece, the value in it. It definitely has value. Medication necessary, and the use of both. There are people out there who will side with one or the other, but I think we're talking about a good balance between the two. And I even use CBT on myself all the time because There are just times when you need to reframe things, look at things a different way, and I really like what you said about the helping others piece. Man, that's where it's at. Um, you know, yeah, introspection, people tend to get tied up in the things that they believe they don't have or lost or things of that nature. It's totally self-absorbed. But when you're helping people, you're right. Um, you're not thinking about yourself, you're thinking about, let me lend this person a hand, in the moment. And I really, really like, Josh, what you said about the comedy. I kind of find myself watching Dave Chappelle when I want to laugh,
Mhm, mhm.
and this inadvertent lessons piece. That's that's really wonderful because I think we take ourselves too seriously, when it comes
Mhm,
to a lot of things,
mhm,
and
mhm.
and almost too literally, and I like the piece about the inadvertent lessons. What am I going to learn today? It's more
Yeah.
of a forward thinking, Josh, way of looking at things because I know the mind is very interesting. When it looks back too much and starts to ruminate, that's when you start having problems, but you
Mhm.
want to look forward. And I tell a lot of my, clients, hey, look forward, to tomorrow. Let's plan some stuff for tomorrow. Look less backwards and more forward, if that makes sense, so that you can actually do some active planning and things like that because that really helps. And I really love this incorporating comedy and helping other people in your day to day, and you're going down the rabbit hole of, oh
Mhm.
my, I don't
Mhm.
really think or feel. I like what you said before about you were thinking it was more mind over matter, but until you knew better. Those
Yeah.
things are
Yeah.
important. I think that's powerful. If you want to say more about any of that stuff, that'd be great because, I think we all have elements of a depression and anxiety. We may or may not realize it. I don't know.
Oh yeah. It's I think I was probably one of the most stubborn people ever to think I didn't have depression and anxiety because I didn't believe in it. And there was definitely a stigma about it growing up, even though I had it within my family. You know, my mom ended up having agoraphobia. And you see things and you just take them as normal, but then when it comes to you, you don't really, it's not like you can see a cut on your arm. It's a chemical
Hmm.
change. And so you really doubt changes within yourself that you can't see outwardly. And even that can
Hmm.
be attitude. So, you know, going back to one of the pieces you said about the past, people have regrets, the future, you have worries, but they call it a present because it's today. You know, that's kind of a lot of the mindfulness piece where you're meditating, you're staying in the moment because in this moment, everything is fine. And I think
Hmm.
that that's what that comedy does is it puts you in the moment today and it makes you stop thinking about the past or
Yeah.
the future. But yet there's some really good research that says that if you plan a vacation early, you're going to enjoy thinking about the vacation for a long time, and you'll actually get more enjoyment out of thinking about it than going on it. So I always try to plan my
Mm.
trips and put them on the calendar as early as possible, just because all year I have something to look forward to. Whereas anytime I need a pick me up, I can just go, well, I got that trip coming up and I got this coming up. And sometimes when you have that depression, you're like, what am I here for? Why? What do I have to live for? And you just look at
Hmm.
the calendar and go, well, I got this trip,
Hmm.
you know. And I know people that
Hmm.
literally hang on to the fact that they have a wedding to go to or a graduation to go to or somebody's event that's not their own, but it gives
Hmm.
them that purpose of this is why I'm here. because if it was up to them, their internal purpose isn't strong. And so
Mm-hmm.
creating an external purpose outside yourself goes right back to helping others. And, you know, I found that finding those pieces of my own puzzle and knowing when to use each piece was really the best therapy I'd ever had. You know, I take my medication every day, just like I'm supposed to. I have my therapy visits. I've never stopped doing them. And people ask me all the time, why do you do them if you feel good? I said,
Mm.
because everybody who feels good stops taking their medication and they don't realize
Right.
that's why they felt good.
That's right.
And
That's
I
right.
said, you know, that's the whole point is first you fight the medication because you don't like the way it makes you feel. And then you fight the medication because you feel fine and don't think you need it. And it's really just human nature to go, I don't want to be on medication. But the
Mm-hmm.
reality of it is that there's medication out there and everything, you know, whether it's a smile that someone gives you, you know, the feeling of a high from a long run, you know, or a pat on the back from your friend, you know, when you see him. There's medication every day. You just got to look for it. You got to give it. You got to ask for it, you know, and I'm a little proud. And so for me, it was hard to ask for help. And
Mm-hmm.
like I said, I was fortunate to have a supportive family that they didn't know what was going on, but they were there. They weren't going anywhere. And I think that was enough for me to go, I can't go anywhere because
Mm.
they need me here. And I think in you know, the dark times when you're having a difficult time with depression, I would say depression more than anxiety, you need to have a purpose that is greater than yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is for acute symptoms. And I think, you know, like I said, the comedy is good for acute. For me, the chronic is exercise. If, you know, if I stopped exercising, I don't know how I'd feel, but I know it wouldn't be as good as I feel now, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And if I stopped taking the medication, I don't know how I'd feel, but it wouldn't be as good as I feel now. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think I've given myself anxiety over changing these things that I know work for me and use the anxiety to fuel my own treatment, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Um, and I think that that's kind of where people should look at is being responsible for themselves. You know, I had a recent conversation with a friend about relationships, and you know, as a male female relationship, and the discussion basically just led to the belief that you have to be responsible for your own happiness.
That's right.
Your partner, your friend, whoever it is not responsible for your happiness. They're also not responsible for your failures. They're
That's
not
right.
the reason you did something. You didn't do it because you thought something of what they would think or do. Ultimately, you're responsible for all your own decisions. And I think that that's the same thing with these treatments, you know, is I don't think I'll ever be cured. I don't think um, I'll ever stop my own treatment. I don't think my doctors will ever stop my treatment. I don't think I'll ever stop talking to a therapist. And what I found is that there's a lot of people that don't get as good a treatment as me because
Mm-hmm.
they're probably not trying as hard or didn't look it up as much or don't advocate with their doctor enough or as much as I did. And that's kind of what this podcast was about is, you know, how do you advocate for yourself within yourself? How do you advocate within your healthcare community? And, you know, how do you live your best life? You know,
That's right.
because ultimately we all want to be happy. And, you know, every time I get over a cold, I'm reminded that the absence of a cold is what I should be grateful for. You know, and
Mm-hmm.
every day I lose that gratitude, you know, that's when I start to become unhappy. You know, that's what helping others does is it reminds you that you don't have that problem and it makes you have gratitude for what you don't have wrong or
Mm-hmm.
what you
Mm-hmm.
perceive to be wrong.
That's right.
Yeah. And so, you know, I think people make gratitude lists and I think I'm a big believer that do your treatment the way that works for you, but if you're not out there advocating for yourself, you're not
Mm-hmm.
giving you're not treating yourself very well, doctor, you know. And I think that doctors are teachers and you have to teach yourself and you have to question those people that are treating you, and you have to respect their knowledge. And even if they can't tell you, you know, why Google doesn't agree with them, you have to respect that as an opinion that is based on evidence that they collect every day with their own eyes and ears. So they can see it even if you can't. And that was
Hmm.
so powerful to me that someone actually knew me because they worked in the same building with me, but did not know them well. And they could tell by the look on my face and how I acted that I was acting differently than I
Hmm.
had before. And, you know, when that first doctor said, I want you to meet my wife, and he said it that way. He didn't say, I'm going to take you to see a psychiatrist because you're clinically depressed. You know,
Hmm.
he was very clever because I probably would have said, no, I don't have depression. I'm not going. And then got in
Hmm.
trouble for that too. But, um, you know, ultimately, it was the best thing that ever happened to me because there was so much stigma at the time that he really knew a really good way to present that to me. And I think that's something, you know, maybe you should get into, Christopher, is how do you present these diagnoses to people that, you know, don't want to hear them, don't want to have them? Because I think that's tough. You know, I think it's really tough what you do.
It's a hard road to hoe, as my mother used to say. Yeah, a lot of people don't really realize they have what they have. You know, I equate it to turning the light on, you know, when you're in the dark. Sometimes we adjust to the dark and we don't realize that there's anything really wrong. Is our disposition that we normally have, and we have grown accustomed to ourselves being that particular way. And, you know, when we don't really realize or have awareness or self-awareness about, you know, what's going on with us, like that individual that said, hey, you know, come meet my wife, um, that we have problems, and I think that we can go a long time without realizing that we have these types of problems, and all of a sudden, you know, you're so far down the road with it until you become in denial. Even I do believe that, and I've seen people who are resistant to treatment because of that. And it's a real hard thing. There are a lot of people who abandon the process. You know, I try to tell people to hang on, you know, and love themselves enough and give themselves grace. And Josh, you know, there's so many people who have a problem with that, you know, because they're just not used to it. I've seen people break down in tears when I say that to them because they're not used to giving themselves, you know, well, self-love, really.
Mhm, mhm.
You know, and it's a tough. I've seen men cry over it, you know, I've seen women cry over it, and it's hard, but yeah, you're right. You know, there are a lot of people who don't have that awareness and who don't know that they're, you know, they've got something that I tell them is chronic, you know,
Mhm.
illness, and it needs to be treated as such, you know, and to love yourself enough, you know, to spend the money to see the therapist and the psychiatrist, and it's an investment in yourself. You know, you invest
Mhm.
in so many other things, but we tend to think that this mechanism is going to run, you know, autonomously. No, it doesn't. You know, there are things that
Mhm.
happen in the psyche that we can't control, things that we get legitimately, you know, through our DNA or epigenetics and so forth. And there are lots of things we need to take care of ourselves. And I like what you're saying about it. I want to kind of mention throughout the word neuroplasticity because
Mhm.
you're talking about that, you know,
Mhm.
and how you're able to set up your vacations. I love that. You know, look forward to those moments. That's neuroplasticity, you know. You're rewiring your brain for happiness. See,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we totally disregard. I don't know if it's the American way or whatever it is, but we all have issues with self-care, as I call it. You know, we don't want to take care of ourselves. We want to take care of everybody else, Josh, but not us,
Mhm.
you know, and that doesn't work either. So I think a well-balanced life helps. I love the exercise piece. You're right. No, no, sir, I don't do enough of it. I can admit to that. But I mean,
Yeah.
but doesn't it make you feel good though? And I agree.
Yeah, for me, exercise is a good thing, but it's like a medication. If
Mm,
one medication worked for everybody, we'd only have one. And
mm-hmm,
exercise is a medication that works for me. It doesn't mean it's the right medication for everybody.
mm-hmm,
And so, sometimes nature is a very powerful medicine. You can just
mm,
sit by a lake in the woods and listen to the leaves, and that can do more for some people than running a marathon ever would,
mm.
and so you have to seek your own medicine, you know and find your own peace. And when I say peace, I mean PEACE, not PIECE.
Yeah.
And you have to find your own peace. And there's a lot of talk today about finding peace in relationships and having your partner bring you peace. And when your partner takes your peace, and you know um, every day, you meet people, you interact with them, are you going to let the person that cut you off in traffic take your peace? Well,
Mm-hmm,
ultimately you still have to be responsible for your own peace. And
mm,
how easy is your peace disturbed? Well, that is truly a value that based on how well you've been diagnosed and treated by yourself. Do you
mm-hmm,
let yourself get easily irritated? Do you let yourself, have a short fuse? Do you let yourself be bothered by something that doesn't bother one of your good friends? You know, Probably my biggest failing is patience. I don't have a lot
mm-hmm,
of patience. And it's because when I do something, it takes me this amount of time. When it takes someone else to do the same thing, it takes them longer. But I always have to
mm.
remember, I've done this thing a lot, and this may be the first time they're doing it.
Right.
And so, one of the things we call them patience practice moments. That's what I do when I feel like I might be getting irritated. Is I take a patience practice moment and go, okay, I need to have some patience here, and I need to come up with a reason why this is happening. And let's say I get cut off in traffic. Well, I'll say, well, this is happening because I would have been in a car accident if I had not been cut off and been at the right time down the road. And then I have to say, well, I got cut off in traffic because they're racing their mother to the hospital to save their life,
Mm-hmm,
and you don't know why
mm-hmm,
these things happen, but we think we do. And that's why we lose patience. And
mm-hmm,
so I always try to use neuroplasticity and recreate reasons why these things should be happening to me.
mm-hmm,
And for example, one of the things that is helping me learn more patience right now is I've decided, oh, I'm going to learn the guitar. And man, it is whooping my butt.
mm-hmm.
But I have to give myself that peace, that grace, and go, well, just because this was easy doesn't mean this should be easy.
Right.
And it's teaching me a lot about how I need to think of others, and how I have to respect the fact that everybody's experience level is different with different things. And I have to be grateful that I may have more experience than them. So I take it as a
Mm-hmm,
gratitude moment when they're doing something and I think it's too slow. You know,
mm-hmm,
I'm just grateful that I can do it faster.
mm-hmm,
And I'm grateful that it gives me a moment to practice my patience. And I'm grateful
mm-hmm,
for the reason that this has occurred to me, because I don't know what would have happened had it not occurred. And so I look for those little silver linings, those little, things that are drops of fate that are there every single day, that you have to create that fate that should be yours, and stop thinking about a piece of fate that you wanted.
mm-hmm,
Giving somebody everything they've always wanted is not a good thing.
mm-hmm.
And so, you have to have unhappiness to be happy.
Mm.
And that's really important when you start looking at these things that happen and go, well, this could make me unhappy, but I'm really grateful it did. You know, my son always would speak back to me. Sometimes he would paraphrase me, and I would even forget something I'd said. But one day, he was around 10 at the time, and something I wasn't happy about something. And he goes, well, Dad, don't forget, you got to have a bad day to appreciate a good one. And it
That
just
was
really
good.
hit home. And I was like, man, I got this 10-year-old schooling me right now. And I'm supposed to act like I knew it first, like he was going to say that. And it's powerful. It's so powerful to hear your own words parroted back to you better than you probably said them to them the first time. And I think that that's really what you got to look for is you got to say, hey, if I hadn't had depression, I wouldn't have found ways to be happy. I wouldn't be as happy as I am today because I'd probably be self-medicating, like so many people do with alcohol, cigarettes,
Oh,
drugs.
yes.
There's a million ways to self-medicate, but they don't treat the problem, they treat the symptoms.
That's right.
And that's ultimately what we're talking about today is how do you treat this problem so that it becomes an asset to you instead of a detriment that you're trying to treat symptomatically. And so, I
You
felt
know,
like, yeah, go ahead.
I apologize for cutting you off. I was just about to say that. But I've been telling clients, people tend to lean into their diagnoses. And I tell them, I said, Josh, I said, you're really symptomatic. You happen to have a
Yeah.
diagnosis, but you're symptomatic, you know. So let's deal with that and so that you can live a good life. I think I've got about 5, 6 minutes left, and I really appreciate all of these golden nuggets that you're dropping. And
Mm.
I have one more question for you.
Yeah.
You've touched on it quite a bit. I like what you said about serving others. Um,
Mhm.
how do you, or what advice would you give if you were to be able to give anybody some advice about being happy?
Mm.
What would that one
I
thing or two things be?
thank you. One of the things that I found, um, so when I help people with their legal problems, a lot of it's just legal education. I'm just explaining, hey, this happened to me, this is what it is, and explaining it's not fair, but it's okay. There's
Mm,
not good, there's not bad. It's just it happened, it didn't happen. But ultimately, they're angry at
mm,
that this happened, that this person didn't treat them well, whether it's getting cut off in traffic or their tooth broke. People come to me. I had one attorney say people see me in the worst times of their lives.
mm,
And so you end up being this counselor because they're not having a good day. And a lot of times they redirect that anger at someone else. And that's something that's poison. When
mm,
you allow yourself to get angry at someone else and to hold it, nothing hurts you more.
mm,
And that's what I would really, really catch on to is there's been a lot of people that I've been unhappy with in my life. I don't like what they did to me, but I've watched them hold on to that anger, maybe against me. Maybe I did something to them too, or we both think we did, but we didn't, who knows? But ultimately, they hold on to it and I see it come back up and it comes back up. And I'm not mad at them at all. And I'd be fine talking to them or seeing them or doing anything and just letting it go. But
mm,
they don't. And I see how unhappy holding on to that anger makes them unhappy.
mm,
It takes energy, it takes effort to stay angry at anything or anyone.
mm-hmm,
And that would be my first thing is don't hold on to anger. You know, I had some issues with my father and he passed away. And, you know, giving that up, giving up that unhappiness with some of the things from my childhood was the best feeling I ever had. Truly forgiving someone and just letting it go, not needing them to be wrong, not needing them to, say they're sorry, just letting it go and giving them the grace that you need to give yourself. I think it's very
Mm,
powerful because if you look at yourself, you made mistakes. So why can't you forgive them just like you do yourself? Why do you hold them to a
mm,
higher standard than you hold yourself? And I
mm,
think that's the ultimately powerful lesson is that look for the good in others, forgive them like you forgive yourself. Don't be mad at them unless you're going to be mad at yourself. And you can't be mad at yourself because you're human. We
mm,
all make mistakes. We're all going to make mistakes. And if you're going to be mad at someone because they're human, you're never going to be happy. And ultimately, that's what we're talking about. When you're unhappy, how do how do you get happy? Well, you can treat all these symptoms and do CBT and medication, but if you hold on to this anger, you're never going to be happy anyway. You're just never going to be happy. You may not have depression, anxiety, but you're not going to be happy. And ultimately, depression, anxiety, take your happiness and getting it back is something that you want to do and you want to hold on to it. But if you give yourself another reason, like anger that you hold on to against others is just like depression, anxiety. It takes
mm,
your life and your happiness from you, and you cannot
mm.
do it. You cannot do it. And you should treat it just like any other mental health problem. And you should look for the symptoms and you should treat those symptoms and you should try and fix it like you fixed everything else. So
Powerful.
that's it. Yeah. Thank you, Christopher. Appreciate that.
I appreciate you, John. I mean, this has been an incredibly powerful, um, powerful podcast. I learned a lot. I know my listeners learning a lot just by listening to this. Josh, I really appreciate you coming on. I really appreciate you sharing these nuggets, and yeah, we might have to do a part two sometime.
Yeah. Happy to do it anytime I can be helpful to others, Christopher, because I like being wise, selfish.
I love it. All right, y'all.
All right.
Hey, everybody have a good day. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.